A CEO throws a black woman out of his 5-star luxury hotel. 20 minutes later, she became his new boss. Elijah Grant believed he was preserving the pristine image of his hotel when he had the well-dressed woman escorted out. What he didn't know was that she held the power to end his career, and she was about to. But that's not even the shocking part. The hotel's cameras captured something during that confrontation that changed everything, and no one saw it coming. If you're enjoying stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's continue. Elijah Grant adjusted his designer cufflinks as he stared out the massive windows of his top-floor office at the Grant Regency Hotel. The city of Atlanta shimmered below, alive with energy, prestige, and ambition, all of which he believed himself to embody. At 45, Elijah was the CEO of one of the highest-rated 5-star hotels in the country. His name was stitched into the linen of the hotel's legacy, and in his mind, its perfection depended on his authority being absolute. He turned slightly to glance at the massive portrait hanging behind his desk. His grandfather, Thomas Grant Sr., the original founder. Elijah often looked to it in moments of decision, not out of sentiment, but to remind himself that power came from legacy, and legacy had rules. Rules about decorum, rules about appearance, rules about who belonged. A chime from the intercom broke his focus. "Yes, Cassie," he said, voice smooth and clipped. "Mr. Grant, we have a guest at the front desk insisting she has a reservation, but her name isn't showing up in the system. She's, not happy." Elijah sighed, brushing a speck of dust off his lapel. "Handle it." "I tried, sir, but she's not leaving. I think you might want to come down." He disliked being pulled into guest matters. That's what managers were for. But something in his assistant's voice triggered the part of him trained to control problems before they escalated. "I'm on my way," he said, already annoyed. As he stepped into the elevator, he checked his phone. A missed call from his teenage son. Another text from his attorney reminding him about the upcoming board meeting with International Elegance Holdings, the conglomerate that now owned 70% of his hotel and would be sending a representative tonight for a surprise visit. Elijah smirked. Let them come. He had every corner polished and every employee trained to perfection. The elevator dinged softly as he descended toward the lobby. She was easy to spot, standing confidently at the check-in counter, arms folded, wearing a sharp navy suit with a bold red blouse underneath. Her skin glowed under the hotel's ambient lighting, and her natural curls framed her face like a crown. She didn't look lost. She looked like someone used to commanding attention, someone used to being respected. And yet something about her presence irritated Elijah. She didn't fit his internal image of guest. Not here, not tonight. The front desk manager approached him quickly. "Mr. Grant, this is Dr. Celeste Morgan. She claims to have a reservation for the Imperial Suite, but—" "I don't claim anything," the woman interrupted, her tone calm but unwavering. "I have a reservation, and I'd like it honored." Elijah stepped forward. "Mr. Elijah Grant, CEO, I understand there's a discrepancy." Celeste turned toward him, unfazed. "Good. Maybe someone with authority can resolve this. I booked the Imperial Suite 3 weeks ago through your corporate system. I have the confirmation email, the code, and the receipt." He didn't ask to see them. Instead, he glanced at the front desk team and said, "I want her escorted out. This is a 5-star establishment, not a place for confusion." A gasp rippled through the lobby. Elijah didn't notice or didn't care. He turned back to Celeste and added, "You're welcome to take this up with your travel agent or whomever scammed you, but you're not staying here tonight." The moment was cold, clinical, calculated, and it would become infamous. Celeste's expression never changed. Her voice didn't rise. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Grant." He stepped closer. "The mistake would be letting anyone who walks in here disrupt the experience of my real guests." "You're certain I don't belong here?" He smirked. "I'm certain." Celeste locked eyes with him. "Then I want you to remember this moment exactly as it happened." Security approached at Elijah's cue. She was escorted out with the same calm dignity she had walked in with. He returned to the front desk and straightened his jacket. Problem resolved. Now let's get back to making this hotel the best in the city. What Elijah didn't know, what would unravel his career in less than 20 minutes, was this. Celeste Morgan wasn't just any guest. She wasn't a travel blogger. She wasn't an influencer. She wasn't someone trying to sneak into luxury. She was the newly appointed Executive Regional Director of Operations for International Elegance Holdings, the company that owned his hotel. And she had just been thrown out of her own property by a man who assumed her presence was a mistake. In the parking garage beneath the hotel, Celeste sat in her rental car and pulled up her laptop. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed out a quick report to the board of directors. CEO Elijah Grant personally ejected me from the hotel lobby after refusing to verify my reservation, despite corporate confirmation. Escalated immediately. Full review and disciplinary recommendation to follow. She attached the video footage from the hotel's own lobby cameras, footage captured via a discreet system she'd accessed with her executive credentials. Then she made a call. Boardroom group chat, her phone displayed. 3 executives picked up, all on camera. "What's going on, Celeste?" asked Margaret Jo, VP of Global Operations. Celeste didn't hesitate. "I was just thrown out of the Grant Regency by the CEO himself. He assumed I didn't belong, refused to verify the reservation, called security." There was a long silence. "Did you record it?" one of them asked. "I did better," she replied. "The hotel recorded it for me." The voice on the other end turned cold. "We'll be there in 15 minutes, don't leave." Celeste sat back in her seat and watched the lights of the hotel gleam above her, so polished, so proud, so deeply unaware of what was coming. She wasn't here just to inspect amenities. She was here to evaluate leadership, and what she'd just witnessed was the exact behavior her division was tasked with eliminating. Elijah Grant had made one fatal assumption, and in doing so, he had just handed her every piece of evidence she needed. The next 20 minutes would change everything. Inside the Grant Regency's executive boardroom, Elijah poured himself 2 fingers of Dalmore 25 into a crystal tumbler and took a long sip. He had just returned from the lobby, where he'd handled the confusion with the so-called guest. The incident was already fading into background noise in his mind, a minor disruption easily smoothed over by professionalism and authority. That was the lie he'd learned to tell himself after every power play, that keeping the hotel's standards meant never apologizing for decisive action. The Imperial Suite was now reassigned. The front desk had moved on. The air in the hotel was quiet again, perfect, just how he liked it. He turned to his assistant, Cassie, who stood at the edge of the room, tablet in hand. "Make sure the concierge sends up fresh orchids to the penthouse. Senator Rivera's wife is particular about the scent." "Yes, Mr. Grant, and the guest you asked about earlier, Dr. Morgan." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "What about her?" Cassie hesitated. "Her confirmation number checked out, just came through the corporate channel. It's valid." Elijah slowly lowered the glass to his desk. "You're telling me that number she showed was real?" "Yes, sir, verified through International Elegance Holdings' executive system." For a second he didn't move, his entire body locked in place. Then he let out a small, dismissive laugh and waved it off. "Must be a system error, probably a glitch. You don't get those codes unless you're an executive." Cassie didn't respond. He poured another sip of whiskey, but it didn't taste the same. Across the city, Celeste sat in a leather chair in the lobby of a private coworking suite. She had taken a short ride from the hotel to a location where she could work in peace. Her team would be there any minute. Meanwhile, her inbox was on fire. 3 executives from International Elegance Holdings had already replied to her incident report. 2 legal representatives had asked for timestamps on the footage, and the CEO of the entire North American division had messaged her directly. "I'm sorry this happened, Dr. Morgan. I trust you know what to do. Full authority is yours." Celeste looked up from the screen. Her hands still trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of this moment. Her entire career had been building to this. She had worked in marketing, management, operations, logistics. She'd studied guest psychology, implicit bias, organizational behavior. And still, none of that had been enough to stop a man like Elijah Grant from seeing her and assuming the worst. She inhaled slowly, then she stood. 15 minutes later, the conference room door opened. Margaret Jo, Jennifer Castillo from corporate security, and Greg Torrance from legal entered briskly. Each carried a laptop and a folder. The look on their faces told her everything. This was serious. "Let's get started," Margaret said, pulling out a chair. Celeste handed them printed transcripts of her interaction with Elijah. Lobby footage begins at 6:08 p.m. and ends at 6:16. He didn't ask for my ID, didn't check the confirmation code, didn't let the front desk verify it. He simply assumed I didn't belong. "And called security," Jennifer added, already reviewing the video. Margaret shook her head. "This isn't just a bias incident. It's a legal issue. That reservation was booked through the executive portal. That means he denied entry to a corporate officer." Greg looked up. "Under internal corporate bylaws, that's a breach of executive protocol, not to mention a potential discrimination case. We are talking termination-level misconduct." Celeste didn't respond right away. She just stared out the window, watching the rain as it tapped rhythmically against the glass. "Do we know if this is the first time?" she asked. Jennifer spoke next. "Actually, no. We pulled previous guest complaints, 12 documented incidents in the past 18 months, all involving minority guests, most resolved at the property level without escalation." "So this isn't an isolated moment," Margaret said grimly. "It's a pattern." Celeste turned back to the room. "Then we handle it like a pattern. I want a full investigation, staff interviews, employee complaints. I want to know exactly what kind of culture Elijah Grant has built inside my hotel." Margaret gave a tight nod. "You got it. What's your next move?" "I'm going back," Celeste said. Jennifer blinked. "Back to the hotel, tonight." "Tonight? You sure that's wise?" Celeste's voice was calm but resolute. "He threw me out of a hotel I now oversee. He should see me walk right back in, this time with the weight of corporate behind me." Greg leaned forward. "Let us draft the statement. Internal only for now. We don't want this leaking to the press until the board reviews it." "I don't want a press war," Celeste said. "I want accountability." Back at the Grant Regency, Elijah was rereading the confirmation code Cassie had printed out. GH04573DM. It matched. It was formatted exactly like every internal corporate reservation he'd ever seen. And still, his gut told him something was off, or maybe that was just pride refusing to accept reality. He called Gerald, the night operations manager. "So, that woman who was here earlier, pull up her reservation." "We already checked. It's real." "I don't care if it's real," Elijah snapped. "Tell me who she is." Gerald hesitated. "You're not going to like it." "Try me." Gerald's voice dropped. "She's not just a guest. She's Dr. Celeste Morgan, newly appointed Regional Executive Director. She oversees all properties in the Southeastern Division." Elijah dropped the glass he was holding. It shattered across the mahogany floor. Gerald was still speaking. "She's your superior, sir." The call ended. He stood in silence for a long moment, staring at the pieces of broken crystal at his feet. Outside his window, the lights of Atlanta flickered in the fog. For the first time in years, Elijah Grant, the man who always had an answer, always had control, felt panic blooming in his chest. Cassie entered quietly. "Sir, corporate security just arrived in the building." He didn't look at her. "Do they know what happened?" She nodded. "I need time." "You may not have it." "Cancel all meetings and get the hotel lawyer on the phone." Cassie hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Mr. Grant, I don't think this is a meeting kind of situation anymore." He turned to her, and in his face was the rarest of things, fear. Back in the hotel parking garage, a black SUV pulled up. Celeste stepped out, flanked by Jennifer and Greg. She wore the same navy suit, now paired with a crisp white blouse, and walked with the confidence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. The doorman, who had opened the glass doors for Elijah 100 times now, rushed to hold it open for her. "Welcome back, Dr. Morgan." Celeste smiled faintly. "Thank you." The lobby was quiet, too quiet. Staff stiffened as she passed, eyes wide, posture tense. They'd heard. Rumors always traveled faster than memos. Gerald was waiting by the front desk, suit pressed, hands ringing slightly. "Dr. Morgan, welcome back." "Thank you, Gerald. Is Mr. Grant in his office?" "Yes, ma'am, he's aware you're here." "Good." As they moved toward the elevator, Celeste paused and looked up. The lobby camera blinked gently, watching. She smiled. The hotel had recorded everything. And now she would decide what came next. The elevator ride to the 45th floor felt longer than it should have. Celeste stood calmly between Jennifer and Greg, her expression composed, her breath steady. Inside, her thoughts were crisp, surgical. There was no room for emotion now. This wasn't personal, not entirely. It was procedural, calculated, strategic, and it was long overdue. The numbers above ticked upward, 38, 39, 40, then a pause. The elevator stopped on 41. A junior staff member stepped in, holding a tray of petit fours intended for the executive lounge. His eyes widened the moment he registered who was inside. He froze. "You can take the next one," Jennifer said evenly. He nodded, stepped back out, and the doors closed again. As they ascended the final floors, Celeste reflected not on Elijah's insult, but on the years that had prepared her for this moment, for the inevitability of having to face someone like him. She remembered the whispers behind her back in boardrooms, the subtle second-guessing, the "you're so articulate" comments that always came coated in condescension. And now she was here, not as someone seeking entry, but as someone who had the keys to the building. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. The corridor was carpeted in slate gray, the walls lined with abstract art meant to impress clients with minimalist taste. At the far end stood Elijah's office, two massive oak doors closed tight. Cassie stood beside them, nervously clutching a folder to her chest. "Dr. Morgan," she said quickly, stepping aside, "he's expecting you." Celeste gave a slight nod. "Thank you." Jennifer pushed the doors open. Elijah was already standing behind his desk, posture stiff, hands clasped in front of him. The room was exactly as she remembered it, pristine, masculine, filled with the kind of wealth that felt curated rather than lived in. A crystal decanter sat untouched beside a set of legal binders. The skyline beyond the glass wall glowed in the fading light. "Dr. Morgan," he said, his voice carefully even. Celeste didn't offer a greeting. She walked slowly into the room, scanning everything. The awards, the framed photo of him with a former senator, a plaque from the American Hospitality Association. "I see you've had a busy day," she said at last. Elijah didn't smile. "I assume you're here regarding this morning's misunderstanding." Greg let out a quiet exhale, as if preparing himself to jump in, but Celeste raised a hand, halting him. She turned fully to Elijah. "I want you to walk me through your version of events, from the moment I entered the lobby." Elijah blinked. "Of course." He walked from behind the desk and stood before her, hands still clasped, like a student called to the principal's office, except he was the principal until about 30 minutes ago. "A guest you approached the front desk claiming a reservation. My staff was unable to locate it. The concierge escalated it to me, as is standard when there's a VIP conflict. I approached, spoke with you, and based on the lack of information in our system, I asked security to remove you." Celeste nodded once. "You say I claimed a reservation." "You did." "I presented my confirmation code, did I?" You did, yes, but it didn't appear valid. Did you try verifying it? Elijah's jaw tensed. No, I assumed it was a mistake. A scam, you called it. He shifted uncomfortably. In the moment, yes. She took a step forward. Why didn't you ask for my ID? He hesitated. You seemed confrontational. Celeste turned to Jennifer. Do we have footage of my demeanor? Jennifer tapped her tablet. Lobby security camera. You were calm, professional. Celeste turned back to Elijah. So let's try again. I walked in calmly, provided my confirmation code, and asked for a reservation I had legitimately booked. And you had me thrown out. Elijah's voice dropped. Dr. Morgan, I didn't know who you were. That's the point, she said, her voice cold. You didn't need to know who I was. You needed to treat me like I belonged. A long silence followed. Greg stepped in now. Mr. Grant, your failure to verify the reservation isn't just poor judgment. It's a violation of internal protocol. That confirmation code was entered through the corporate executive portal. I understand, Elijah said quietly. Celeste looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time. He wasn't the towering presence from earlier. He looked smaller, diminished. She wondered briefly whether he understood what he'd done, whether this was just fear of consequence or if something deeper was unraveling. Elijah, she said, voice steady, this hotel is under review, a full internal audit of its culture, management practices, and incident history. As of now, you are suspended from all leadership duties pending final board review. Elijah's throat moved as he swallowed hard. Effective immediately, he asked. Yes. She turned to Jennifer. He will remain on site for questioning, but he is not permitted access to the staff-only levels or the internal systems. Jennifer nodded, understood. Elijah opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. There was nothing left to say. Cassie, still outside the office, watched the corporate team file out one by one. Celeste exited last. She turned to the assistant briefly. You knew, didn't you? Cassie flushed. I wasn't sure at first. But you were sure enough to be scared when I came back. Cassie looked down. Yes. Celeste's expression didn't soften. People like you, Cassie, people who don't speak up, you're the reason this continues. Cassie's voice cracked. I didn't know what would happen. You do now. With that, Celeste walked away. An hour later, in a high-rise downtown conference room, Margaret Jo was reviewing internal documents and guest complaint logs. 12 incidents over 2 years, all dismissed at the property level. Each involved guests of color who had been denied service, questioned about payments, or accused of behavior that wasn't supported by evidence. Each complaint had been closed with the same phrase, no further action required. Margaret highlighted the pattern. This wasn't just bias, it was strategy. In the Grant Regency's basement, Gerald, the night operations manager, sat across from Jennifer, looking nervous. I've worked here 6 years, he said. I've seen this happen over and over, but when it came from the top, we couldn't challenge it. Jennifer leaned in. Why didn't you escalate? I did, once, to HR, but nothing changed. They said we were misinterpreting guest behavior, that it was all part of upholding brand standards. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. Brand standards. He nodded. That's what they called it, maintaining the experience for our elite guests, which usually meant making sure people like me or guests like Dr. Morgan didn't make it too far past the lobby. Jennifer's jaw clenched. Do you have documentation? I kept notes, Gerald said, pulling out a folder. Names, dates. I didn't know if anyone would ever ask you, but I hoped. He slid the folder across the table. In her hotel suite, Celeste opened her laptop again. Emails were pouring in now, internal inquiries, staff statements, press warnings. The PR team was already spinning a response. But she wasn't interested in spin. She was interested in the truth. She typed a message directly to the board. Full investigation underway. Pattern confirmed. I will be returning to the property tomorrow with a full internal oversight team. Recommend preparing for executive disciplinary review. Hotel staff largely cooperative. Evidence mounting. This may become a case study or a scandal. The outcome depends on how quickly we act." She clicked send. Then she leaned back in her chair and looked out at the city she loved, the industry she had devoted her life to, the power structures she had spent her career navigating. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel like she was surviving it. She felt like she was changing it. Morning arrived with the sharp edge of clarity. The sun sliced through the Atlanta skyline, casting cold streaks of light across the polished stone floors of the Grant Regency's lobby. What had once been a sanctuary of curated elegance now buzzed with invisible tension. Staff whispered behind coffee carts. Managers walked briskly, avoiding eye contact. The scent of fresh orchids still lingered in the air, but it could no longer mask the rot beneath the surface. Elijah Grant stood in front of the same window he'd admired 100 times, only now the view felt distant, like looking out at a city that no longer belonged to him. The corner office was still his for now, but the energy had shifted. It pulsed like a countdown clock just beneath the polished surface of his empire. He hadn't slept. He had barely spoken since being informed of his suspension. A man who'd once spoken with ease on live panels, who'd been featured in industry magazines, now found himself alone with silence and consequence. There was a knock at the door, sharp, professional. "Come in," he said, voice hoarse. Jennifer Walsh entered, trailed by 2 other internal security advisors. Not police, not yet, but close enough that Elijah straightened his spine instinctively. "Mr. Grant," she began, setting a file on his desk, "we've completed the first phase of our interviews. Staff reports, guest complaints, internal memos." He didn't speak, just opened the folder. Page after page, testimony, documentation, timelines, confirmations, all damning. "Is Dr. Morgan here?" he asked. "She'll be joining us shortly, but I wanted you to see the facts before the next phase begins." "And what's the next phase?" he asked bitterly. Jennifer met his eyes. "Consequences." She left him with the file. Downstairs, Celeste was walking the service corridors of the hotel, flanked by Gerald and another senior staff member, Mariana, the housekeeping manager. These halls were not designed for guests. No chandeliers, no marble, just exposed piping, industrial lights, and narrow passageways lined with carts, laundry bins, and the quiet hum of machines. But Celeste knew this was where the truth lived, not in the penthouses, in the backstage of luxury. "We train our staff hard," Mariana said, leading her past the linen room. "But when the culture from the top doesn't match the mission, things start to fray." "How long have you worked under Mr. Grant?" Celeste asked. 4 years, he's efficient, very hands-on, but he has preferences." Celeste raised an eyebrow. "Preferences?" Mariana hesitated. There were patterns. Rooms assigned to certain guests were downgraded. Specific requests were ignored if the guest didn't fit a certain profile. Celeste nodded slowly. "Do you have records?" "I started keeping my own logs last year. I didn't know who to report to. Every time I flagged something to mid-level management, it disappeared." Gerald glanced at Celeste, then added, "The term we heard most often was maintaining the aesthetic." Celeste stopped walking. "Maintaining the aesthetic, what does that mean in practice?" Mariana's voice dropped. "It meant keeping the guest list refined. Translation: white, wealthy, familiar. Anyone who didn't look the part was questioned, scrutinized, or conveniently inconvenienced until they left." Celeste stood still in the hallway for a long moment. The words echoed. Maintaining the aesthetic. It wasn't just a phrase, it was a policy. A cultural code that had been embedded into the very fabric of the hotel's operations, not written in manuals, not tracked on spreadsheets, but whispered, enforced, believed. She turned back toward the elevators. "Bring your logs to my suite. I want them reviewed by legal today." And Mariana, Thank you for telling the truth." The woman nodded, emotion tightening her face. "We've been waiting a long time for someone who would listen." Celeste returned to her temporary suite, which had been converted into a war room. A long glass table held 4 laptops, 2 whiteboards, and folders spread across every surface. Margaret was already on a call with the PR division. Greg was reviewing contract clauses. Aisha Patel, the company's new director of equity and inclusion, sat in the corner compiling a timeline of events. Celeste walked in and removed her blazer, now down to her white blouse and slacks. She rolled up her sleeves. "How bad is it?" she asked. Aisha looked up. "It's systemic. It wasn't just Elijah. It was everyone trained under him. Front desk managers, concierge staff, even junior interns picked up his language. We've got at least 47 guest incidents we're verifying now, all involving discriminatory behavior, most swept under internal service protocols." Celeste sat at the head of the table. "And the staff?" "Divided. Some are scared, some are angry, a few are defiant, but a surprising number are relieved." "Relieved?" "Because someone finally showed up with authority and said, 'Enough.'" Celeste looked over at Margaret and the board. "They're watching everything," Margaret replied. "They haven't spoken publicly, but they've empowered us to act. You have full discretion." Celeste let that settle in. Full discretion. It was a gift and a burden. "I want a meeting," she said finally. "This afternoon, all staff, everyone who worked under Elijah. I want to speak to them directly." Aisha raised an eyebrow. "That's not common during a pending investigation." "Nothing about this is common," Celeste replied. "I want them to hear it from me." 3 hours later, the grand ballroom was filled with rows of staff: housekeeping, bellmen, concierges, servers, security. Dozens of employees seated in silence, waiting. Many had heard rumors. Most had guessed the truth. But none of them had expected to see the woman who had been thrown out of the lobby now standing at the front of the room with a corporate badge and a commanding gaze. Celeste stepped up to the podium. She didn't use a microphone. "My name is Dr. Celeste Morgan," she said. "I am the Regional Executive Director of Operations for International Elegance Holdings." No one spoke. "You may remember me as the guest who was removed from this hotel yesterday by Mr. Elijah Grant." A few heads turned, some lowered. What happened yesterday was not an isolated mistake. It was the result of a culture that has been allowed to grow unchecked, a culture of exclusion, bias, and silent compliance. The silence deepened. "But I'm not here to punish everyone. I'm here to make this right." She stepped away from the podium and walked slowly across the front of the room. "Some of you participated in that culture. Some of you fought against it quietly. Others stayed silent because you thought you had no power. I understand all three, but as of today, silence is no longer an option." She paused and made eye contact with several in the front row. "We will be implementing new equity training, new reporting structures, and new leadership evaluations. Every department will be reviewed. Every complaint will be documented. And if you cannot align yourself with a culture of true hospitality for everyone, then you are welcome to leave." No applause. No reaction. Just truth. "But if you stay, if you choose to be part of the solution, then we will build something better, together." She returned to the podium. "This is not about revenge. It's about responsibility, because luxury should never come at the cost of someone's dignity." She turned to leave, then paused. "I will be meeting privately with any employee who wishes to share their experience. No retaliation, no filters, just honesty." As she exited the ballroom, Gerald watched her from the back row, his throat tight. He had waited years for someone like her, and now she was here not to observe, but to lead. Elijah from his office upstairs had seen the meeting announcement. He hadn't been invited. He wasn't on the staff schedule anymore, but he knew what was happening, the unraveling of everything he'd built, and yet what haunted him most wasn't that he was losing control. It was that the people beneath him weren't mourning it. They were relieved. The boardroom on the 47th floor was colder than usual. Not in temperature, the thermostat was set to the standard 72 degrees, but in atmosphere. The weight of expectation and consequence hung thick in the air as Elijah Grant sat at the long walnut table, staring at a legal pad he hadn't touched. Around him, members of International Elegance Holdings, Compliance Division filed in silently, followed by 2 members of corporate HR and a neutral observer from the company's legal advisory team. He had been in this room countless times before, delivering quarterly performance updates, pitching renovations, selling luxury as if it were religion. Now he was the one being assessed. Celeste entered last, flanked by Aisha Patel and Margaret Jo. She did not sit at the table immediately. Instead, she stood near the window, her back to the room, looking out over the city she'd been ejected into just days earlier. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. Elijah, Margaret began, opening a thin blue folder in front of her. We are here for a preliminary review of the findings regarding guest discrimination, managerial misconduct, and failure to uphold corporate hospitality standards. This is not a final judgment meeting, but everything discussed today will be entered into formal record. Elijah cleared his throat. Understood. Celeste turned now, walking calmly to the end of the table. She still didn't sit. Her hands rested lightly on the back of the chair meant for her, but she didn't use it. Her presence didn't need height to feel superior. Elijah, she said, her voice even, you've had the highest satisfaction ratings for white guests in the entire Southeastern Division. He straightened slightly. Yes, I take pride in that. She nodded, but simultaneously, you've had the lowest satisfaction ratings from minority guests, a 23% drop in satisfaction among black guests, a 17% drop among Latino guests, a 19% drop among guests of Asian descent. How do you explain that? He opened his mouth, but nothing came. You can say it, she added. Say the part you're thinking. I don't discriminate, he said flatly. I treat every guest the same. Aisha's pen tapped against her folder. That's part of the problem. Treating every guest the same ignores the fact that some guests are treated unfairly before they even speak. Your staff learned who to prioritize, who to ignore, who to question, and you rewarded them for it. Margaret interjected. We've gathered testimony from 15 employees who said they were told, directly or indirectly, that guests who looked out of place should be discreetly removed or redirected. That was never official policy, Elijah replied, tone tightening. But it was your culture, Celeste said. He leaned forward now, desperate to regain footing. I built this hotel's reputation. I brought in celebrity clients, hosted world leaders, maintained 5-star reviews through 2 recessions. And you did it, Celeste said, by deciding who was worth serving. The silence was complete. Then Elijah's voice dropped. I didn't mean for it to become this. But it did, she replied, and now we're cleaning it up. Margaret closed her folder. We'll reconvene once the board has completed its review. Until then, your access to all internal systems, vendors, and hotel communications is revoked. Elijah stood slowly, nodding once. His face was unreadable, but his eyes betrayed the truth. The fall had begun. As the others left, Celeste remained behind. She watched him approach the door, but before he exited, she spoke softly. Why didn't you just ask me who I was? He turned halfway, shoulders tense, because I didn't think I needed to. That's the part that'll follow you, she said. Not that you made a mistake, but that you didn't think you could. He left without another word. Later that afternoon, Celeste walked the grounds of the hotel. It was something she did at every property she oversaw, not a tour, not a performance, just presence, quiet, observant, real. She passed bellboys pushing luggage carts, a concierge making polite small talk with a couple from Paris, and a pastry chef wheeling out a cake the size of a suitcase. All of it flowed like choreography, elegant, efficient, uninterrupted. But it was the way they looked at her now that was different. Not with fear. With attention. Respect earned not from title, but from truth. She entered the staff lounge unannounced. The room stilled, a few voices lowered to whispers, others stood as if unsure what to do. "Don't get up," she said calmly, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge like anyone else. "Dr. Morgan," one of the younger concierges asked. "Yes. I just wanted to say, what you said in the ballroom earlier, it meant something. Some of us have been pretending not to see what's been happening for years." She turned to him, "And now? Now I'm ready to stop pretending." Celeste smiled, "Then let's get to work." Meanwhile, back in the legal suite 2 floors above, Jennifer Walsh was sifting through a growing archive of employee statements. Gerald had turned over more records. Mariana had submitted screenshots of deleted emails. And another surprise had emerged. A former assistant manager, long transferred to another property, had sent in a private affidavit. It detailed an incident from 18 months ago where a guest, an elderly black woman with platinum status, had been made to wait in the lobby for an hour while younger, wealthier-looking guests were checked in first. Elijah had allegedly praised the staff member afterward for discreet prioritization. The phrase chilled Jennifer. Discreet prioritization. That was the branding of bias, the language of exclusion wrapped in the disguise of policy. She forwarded the affidavit directly to Celeste with a single note. "The pattern is worse than we thought." That evening, Celeste returned to her suite to find her phone blinking with missed calls. One was from her brother, another from a local news reporter, the second one today. But it was the message from her mother that stopped her. "Saw the news, proud of you, but don't forget to rest. You can't rebuild a system if you burn yourself out first." Celeste sat down at the window, watching the sky shift from gold to blue to black. She thought about how far she'd come, about how far there still was to go, and about the girl she used to be, the one who had memorized hospitality handbooks just to prove she was qualified, who had practiced the perfect pitch of her voice to sound non-threatening in meetings, who had smiled through microaggressions because she couldn't afford to fight every battle. That girl was still inside her. But she didn't run things anymore. Now Dr. Celeste Morgan ran things. And tomorrow she would walk back into that hotel not as the victim of someone else's prejudice, but as the architect of a better future. A future where everyone belonged. The next morning began with overcast skies, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Inside the Grant Regency, the energy had shifted. It was subtle, a new rhythm, a new current moving through the walls like a quiet reckoning. Staff arrived early, uniforms were pressed, eyes were sharp. For the first time in years, people looked not over their shoulders, but toward the future. Celeste was in the service hallway by 7:30 a.m., sipping coffee from a plain black mug, wearing a dark grey pantsuit and low heels that clicked with authority across the tile. No entourage, no pretense, just presence. She made her way to the HR office, where Mariana, Gerald, and Aisha were already waiting, each of them standing beside a whiteboard covered in color-coded notes. "How many interviews left?" Celeste asked. 23 scheduled, Aisha replied. "About a third of those are from departments that reported directly to Elijah. Some are nervous, others are angry." "Angry at him?" Celeste asked. Aisha paused, angry at themselves for staying quiet, for surviving instead of standing up. Celeste set her mug down. "We don't blame them," she said. "We show them the door is open now, and we hold space for the ones who want to walk through it." Mariana handed her a printed report, staff incident tracking by department. "We found something," she said. "A concierge manager who coded several guests with a special internal tag in the reservation software, A4. No one would have questioned it unless they knew what to look for." Celeste's eyebrows knit. A4. Anonymous profile, Category 4. It was unofficial, never documented. But we believe it was used to flag guests that Elijah considered disruptive, to the aesthetic. Celeste's voice went flat. And what kind of guests were flagged? Gerald answered, mostly black, some Latino, a few interracial couples, one Indian CEO whose staff was asked to verify his ID twice. The rage came slowly, not explosive, but cold and deliberate. Celeste's fingers tightened around the report. I want every guest who received an A4 tag reviewed, personally, by me. Mariana nodded, already started. Just down the hall, Elijah was packing his office. Or pretending to. The leather briefcase on his desk sat half-zipped, filled with papers that no longer mattered. Awards, letters of recommendation, a framed photo of his father handing him the ceremonial key to the hotel on opening day. It all felt like evidence now, relics of a legacy crumbling in real time. The knock came quietly. He looked up to find Cassie standing in the doorway. I figured you might need help, she said, not quite meeting his eyes. He nodded silently and went back to folding his suit jacket into a garment bag. It didn't belong here anymore, neither did he. She moved toward the bookshelf and began taking down a line of binders, 5 years of quarterly reports. Elijah, she said finally, why didn't you check the reservation that night in the lobby? His shoulders rose, then fell, because I thought I knew what I was doing. She placed the binder on the shelf a little harder than necessary. You thought you knew who she was. He looked up, her eyes were full now, not tears, just truth. I defended you, she whispered, to so many people. I believed in what you were building. I was building something, he said. No, she replied, you were protecting something, and it didn't include all of us. They said nothing else as they finished packing. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, Celeste stood in the executive conference room, now repurposed into a reform headquarters. Aisha, Jennifer, and Greg sat at the long glass table while Mariana brought in new incident logs. We've reviewed 34 A4-tagged guests, Aisha began. So far, 29 of them reported negative experiences. 5 of them had already filed complaints that were suppressed at the property level. Suppressed how? Celeste asked. Marked as resolved internally, never escalated. Greg interjected. We're looking at exposure if any of these guests decide to pursue legal action. They won't, Celeste said, because we're going to contact them first, apologize, offer full transparency and reparations. We own it before it owns us. Mariana blinked. You want us to call them? Yes, not a generic email, not a form letter. A real person, a real conversation, someone from this hotel calling and saying, we got it wrong. Greg leaned back. That's bold. That's necessary. Celeste turned to Jennifer. What about Elijah? He's still in his office, packing. He hasn't spoken to anyone else. Schedule a final debrief, Celeste said, one-on-one. Margaret looked up sharply from her laptop. Are you sure that's wise? Celeste nodded. He needs to hear it, not from legal, not from HR, from me. That afternoon, Elijah sat across from her for the first time since the board review. His tie was gone. His cufflinks were in his bag. He looked smaller, not just physically, but existentially, as if the structure that had once defined him had collapsed and he was sitting in the rubble. Celeste didn't start with pleasantries. You built this place like a temple, she said, and then you decided who was holy enough to stay inside. He didn't argue. She opened a folder and slid it toward him. A guest profile. A woman named Camille Lewis, a lawyer from Washington, D.C. Platinum member, turned away at check-in due to a system error that was never logged. She had an A4 tag, Celeste said. She also has 110,000 followers on social media and just sent me an email asking if we ever plan to answer her complaint from last year. He looked down at the file. I didn't know about her. No, Celeste replied, you didn't care to. He looked up, and for the first time, there was no arrogance in his eyes, just regret. You're right. She didn't flinch, I know. I wanted the hotel to be perfect. And it was, she said, for people who looked like you. The silence between them wasn't angry, it wasn't even bitter. It was the kind of silence that follows ruin, the hush after collapse, before anything new is built. What happens now? He asked quietly. Celeste folded her hands. You resign, publicly, with full accountability, no excuses, no spin, and you leave the hospitality industry permanently. His throat tightened. You end my career. No, she said, you did that. I'm just making sure you don't hurt anyone else on the way out. He nodded once. It was the only thing left to do. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. I was wrong. Celeste didn't soften. Yes, you were. He left without another word. That evening, the official resignation was posted on the hotel's website and distributed to media outlets. It was short, formal, direct. Elijah Grant has resigned as CEO of the Grant Regency Hotel, effective immediately. We thank him for his years of service and acknowledge the importance of accountability in preserving the integrity of our brand. Internally, Celeste sent a different message to the staff. We do not grow by preserving comfort, we grow by confronting truth. And the truth is, this hotel failed to live up to the standards of inclusion and excellence we claim to uphold. That failure ends now. A new chapter begins, and you are all part of it. It was signed simply, Dr. Celeste Morgan, Regional Executive Director. In the break room, Mariana wiped her eyes. In the kitchen, the sous chef read the message aloud to her team like scripture. At the front desk, Gerald placed a printed copy next to the bell he rang at every shift change. For the first time in years, the Grant Regency felt honest. Not perfect, but real. And that was the beginning of something better. The first day without Elijah Grant felt like the first real sunrise the hotel had seen in years. It wasn't obvious, not on the surface. The carpets were still vacuumed in perfect lines. The lobby piano still played its slow, elegant tunes on a timed speaker loop. Guests checked in, valets parked cars, bellhops delivered luggage. But beneath the polished choreography, there was something new. Breath, relief, possibility. Celeste arrived early again, this time walking through the main entrance. No service corridors, no side doors. She passed the marble fountains, the oversized floral arrangements, and the famous gold chandelier she'd once admired as a college student on a field trip to the hotel. It looked the same. But now she belonged here, and more importantly, others like her would too. Gerald greeted her in the lobby with a tablet full of staff notes and pending follow-ups. Morning, Dr. Morgan. She smiled. Morning, Gerald. He walked beside her as they headed to the elevators. The staff is buzzing. Everyone saw the resignation. Some are still trying to figure out if it's real. It's real, she said, but so is what we're building next. In the executive conference room, Mariana was already waiting, along with Aisha and 3 new faces, team leads from other properties brought in to support the Grant Regency's reform effort. They were people Celeste trusted, people who understood that change didn't just come from policy, it came from posture, from intention, from consistency. She began the meeting without preamble. We've removed the barrier, now we build the bridge. Aisha nodded. Departmental culture reviews are underway. We are finding both good and bad. Some teams are quietly progressive, others not so much. Let's get ahead of it, Celeste said. I want every manager retrained, every evaluation system updated, promotions paused until bias reviews are complete. One of the new team leads, a sharp-eyed woman named Devon from the Houston branch, raised a question. What do we do about the loyalty guests, the ones who loved Elijah's version of luxury, the regulars who might push back if things look or feel different? Celeste didn't hesitate. We don't bend, we explain. Devon nodded slowly. We are telling the truth now. Yes, Celeste said, and if a guest doesn't respect that truth, they're free to stay elsewhere. Back in the staff lounge, Gerald stood before a group of front desk clerks and concierges, leading a new kind of training session. He held up a list of flagged phrases, things once said casually, thoughtlessly, things no one had ever questioned. Double-check that credit card. Unless there's a system flag, don't say it. Are you sure you're in the right hotel? Not only unacceptable, but it's not your job to make that judgment. You don't look like a platinum member. That's not a joke, that's bias. The group nodded, a few writing things down. It wasn't about shamming anyone, it was about unlearning. Gerald looked around. We're not being asked to be perfect, we're being asked to be fair. In the kitchen, the head chef, Matteo, was working with Aisha on new hospitality standards for back-of-house culture. It turned out bias didn't stop at the front desk. I had a dishwasher last year, Matteo confessed, who left because another line cook kept calling him Quiet Storm. He said it wasn't racist, just a nickname. Aisha blinked. Did the employee ever say how he felt about it? He didn't have to, Matteo replied, but no one stopped it. Well, now you do. Matteo nodded, starting today. Upstairs, Celeste met privately with the hotel's new interim leadership candidates, those under consideration to take over as general manager in the post-Elijah era. 3 department heads, 1 assistant manager, 1 outside candidate from another IEH property. She didn't ask for resumes. She asked for values. What does inclusive luxury look like to you? She asked each one. What happens when a guest violates the dignity of your staff? How do you lead when no one's watching? Some stammered, some delivered polished answers. One quietly told her, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn and listen. That candidate went straight to the top of her list. After the interviews, Celeste stepped out onto the hotel's rooftop garden, a lush, curated space with city views and carefully arranged pathways. It had once been reserved for premier guests only. Now it was open to all. She passed a family of 4 black, middle-class, clearly tourists, snapping pictures near the koi pond. The father gave her a nod. She returned it with a smile. Moments later, Gerald joined her with new updates. We've received a reply from one of the A4 guests, he said, reading from his phone. Her name is Camille Lewis. You mentioned her the other day. Celeste straightened. What did she say? She said she was shocked. She didn't expect a call, thought her complaint had disappeared into the void. And now, she's impressed. She wants to return. She said she'd never stayed at a property where someone actually followed up, especially not someone in leadership. Celeste let the wind carry that feeling for a moment. Change was slow, but it was happening. That afternoon, she joined Mariana for a tour of the staff dormitory housing, a part of the property rarely seen by executives. Some of the night shift employees stayed there during the week. It was clean, but neglected. The laundry room had a broken vending machine. The Wi-Fi was patchy. The walls were bare. This, Celeste said, is just as much the Grant Regency as the lobby. Mariana nodded. No one's touched it in years. Elijah didn't like to spend budget on back-end operations. Well, we're changing that. Starting this month, staff amenities get the same attention as guest perks. They walked through the halls slowly, staff poking out of rooms, startled but smiling. You came all the way back here, one night janitor asked. I'll go wherever the truth lives, Celeste replied. That night, Celeste sat in her suite, sipping tea, as she reviewed the final resignation documents Elijah had submitted. Clean, polite, devoid of accountability, but functional. Greg had offered to revise them. She had refused. Let his silence speak, she'd said. Sometimes the absence of remorse is the loudest confession. A message lit up her phone. It was from Camille Lewis. I just checked in, room 903. Your staff welcomed me like I belonged. No questions, no side glances, just kindness, thank you. Celeste closed her eyes and let that moment sink into her bones. Progress wasn't always loud. It didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it looked like a smile at check-in. Sometimes it was a room number. Tomorrow would bring more reforms, more meetings, more resistance probably. But tonight, the Grant Regency stood just a little taller. Not because its tower reached higher, but because its foundation was finally being rebuilt with integrity. The headline dropped before sunrise. Luxury hotel ousts CEO over discrimination allegations. Replacement is the very guest he expelled. It spread like wildfire across news platforms and social media. Within hours, every hospitality blog, corporate equity consultant, and think piece pundit had weighed in. For some, it was a story of poetic justice. For others, a warning shot. But for most, it was something else entirely, a sign that the world was shifting. Celeste read the headline in silence from her office as the city outside blinked awake. The phones were already ringing. Not with crisis, with curiosity. Requests for interviews. Partnership inquiries. Invitations to panels. She declined all of them. She didn't need a spotlight, she needed results. In the boardroom, Gerald, Aisha, and Mariana sat with her reviewing the ripple effects of the news cycle. We've had a 36% spike in web traffic, Mariana reported, but not from the usual demographic, younger visitors, more diverse, and the feedback in our booking surveys is already shifting. Gerald pulled up analytics on his tablet. Guests are leaving comments about fairness, about representation, about feeling like this hotel actually sees them. Aisha tapped her pen. The media attention helps, but it also puts us under a microscope. If we're going to become a case study, let's be a complete one, with real change, not just cosmetic improvements. Celeste nodded, then we go further. She stood and walked to the whiteboard, scribbling 3 words: access, accountability, atmosphere. Access, she said, underlining it. No more exclusionary codes, no more aesthetic filtering, and no more gatekeeping who belongs in a 5-star environment. Accountability, Aisha added, following her lead, which means not just removing bad actors, but rewarding the right ones, people who speak up, people who do the invisible work to make this place better. And atmosphere, Mariana concluded, not just decor and lighting, but emotional climate. A guest should feel like they belong the moment they walk in, no matter what they wear, where they're from, or what they look like. Celeste looked at them all. We make that our foundation, not marketing, not performance, values. As the day progressed, that foundation was put to the test. A VIP guest, Mr. Daniel Horst, a longtime friend of Elijah Grant and a notoriously entitled investor, arrived at the front desk, clearly unaware of the hotel's transformation. He tossed his passport onto the marble counter without a word and adjusted his cufflinks as if they were crown jewels. Gerald stepped forward, calm and courteous. "Welcome back to the Grant Regency, Mr. Horst. I see you're booked in the Ambassador Suite for 3 nights. "I am," Horst said without looking up, "and I expect the wine list in my room, not the app menu. Also, don't assign me a room next to noise." "Noise, sir." Horst leaned in and said too loudly, "Families or loud couples, you know what I mean." Gerald didn't flinch. "We'll do our best to ensure your comfort, but all guests are treated equally here. Room assignments are made by availability, not profile." Horst narrowed his eyes. "You new here?" "No, sir, just under new leadership." Before Horst could respond, Celeste entered the lobby from the elevator, having heard part of the exchange. Their eyes met. He stiffened. "Well, you must be the one I've been hearing about." "I imagine you've been hearing a lot lately," she replied coolly. "I suppose this place is under different management now." "It's under honest management." Horst smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's see how long that lasts." She stepped closer. "It'll last as long as it takes for dignity to stop being considered radical." He turned away, muttering something under his breath, and walked toward the elevators without another word. Gerald exhaled slowly. Celeste looked at him, handled perfectly. He smiled. I like this version of the hotel. So do I. Later that afternoon, Celeste met with members of the hospitality union representing the hotel's housekeeping and maintenance staff. These were the hands and backs behind the brand, the workers often overlooked in glossy brochures but who held the true pulse of the property. They gathered in the old employee cafeteria, a space that hadn't been updated in a decade, with flickering lights and stained ceiling tiles. It was far from the luxury the guests enjoyed, and Celeste noticed every detail. "Thank you for coming," she began, standing in front of the vending machines. One of the union reps, a soft-spoken man named Javier, cleared his throat. "We've been waiting for someone to ask us what we think." "Well," Celeste replied, "that's why I'm here, tell me." And they did. About being asked to enter certain rooms only when guests were out, about hearing slurs whispered under breath, about requests for cleaners who don't look like criminals, about how no one had believed them when they reported it. They didn't cry, they didn't raise their voices, they didn't demand anything. They just told the truth. And that truth hit Celeste harder than any headline had. "You've been carrying this alone," she said softly. Javier nodded. "It's heavy, but we needed this job." Celeste stepped forward. "Starting this month, staff conditions are being re-evaluated. You'll have upgraded facilities, access to grievance counseling, and most importantly, the power to report without fear." A pause, then, for the first time in a long time, someone clapped. Not for performance, not for protocol. For hope. Across the city, news continued to spread. One outlet ran a segment called "The Hotel That Said No to Discrimination." Another profiled Celeste's rise, tracing her career from entry-level associate to regional executive. She ignored the noise, the praise, the drama. She wasn't here to be famous. She was here to finish the work. That night she returned to the rooftop garden, alone this time. The city lights blinked below, neon and gold and endless. She leaned against the railing, letting the wind undo her composure for just a moment. She thought of her parents, of her first job folding brochures for a conference center in Virginia, of the day she bought her first suit from a thrift store, hoping it would make her look qualified. She thought of the girl in the hotel lobby, the version of herself who had been told no without question. And she smiled. Because that girl didn't disappear. She evolved. And now she stood over an empire she didn't have to beg to enter. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "The board is ready, they've reviewed everything, call when you're alone." Celeste walked back inside, sat on the bench near the koi pond, and dialed. Margaret answered immediately. "They've signed off." "On what?" "Your permanent placement." Celeste's breath caught. "You're not interim anymore," Margaret said. "You're staying." And for the first time in days, maybe years, Celeste let herself feel it. Not relief. Not vindication. But peace. She hadn't just survived. She had changed the game. The plaque was small, brushed gold, elegant, understated, and it hung just to the left of the staff entrance to the Grant Regency's West Wing. It read, "Excellence is not who you serve, it's how you serve. Dr. Celeste Morgan." Celeste hadn't asked for it to be installed. Gerald and Mariana had surprised her with it the morning after the board confirmed her permanent appointment. No fanfare, no press release, just quiet acknowledgement of the shift taking root within the building's DNA. She touched the corner of the plaque as she passed it, then stepped into the training room where the newest orientation session was about to begin. 3 new hires sat nervously at the long table, a young front desk agent named Simone, a hospitality intern named Marcus, and a bellhop in training named Alonzo, who had taken a bus from Mississippi just for this opportunity. Celeste stood at the front of the room, with her hands clasped casually in front of her. "I don't usually do these myself," she began, smiling lightly, "but I thought it was important, because this hotel just became something different, and if you're here now, you're part of that." Simone raised a hand timidly. Different how?" Celeste met her eyes. "Different in that we don't just serve luxury anymore, we serve justice." The room went quiet. Marcus blinked. "Is that allowed in hospitality?" Celeste smiled again. "Not only is it allowed, it's necessary." She walked slowly along the table, speaking with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to prove itself anymore. When you greet someone at the front desk, you are not just checking ID, you are acknowledging identity. When you carry someone's bag, you are not just transporting luggage, you are honoring a journey. They listened, transfixed. "This hotel used to have rules," she continued, "unspoken ones, about who looked like they belonged, about what excellence was supposed to look like. Those rules are gone, now we replace them with values." Simone nodded slowly. "Any questions?" Celeste asked. Alonso cleared his throat. "Just one. Is it true what they say about how you became the boss here?" Celeste didn't flinch. "It's true. I walked in as a guest. I was thrown out by someone who didn't think I belonged." A pause. "And 20 minutes later, I was in charge." Marcus's eyes widened. "That's wow." "It's not about revenge," Celeste said. "It's about remembering that we are never what people assume of us, and we should never do that to others." The session ended in applause, not performative, but real. It wasn't just about rules or orientation policies. It was a baptism into something new. Downstairs, Aisha was finalizing an overhaul of the guest resolution policy. Under Elijah, complaints had been filtered and minimized. Now, every guest issue, big or small, was tracked, evaluated, and followed up on by a human being, not just an algorithm or AI chatbot. She met with the complaint resolution team in the former executive suite, a space once filled with wine menus and ego. Now it was a room of reckoning. "Guest recovery is more than upgrades and credits," she told the team. "It's acknowledgement. No one wants to be bought off. They want to be heard." A young employee, Darnell, raised his hand. "We had a guest last week, single mom, traveling with 2 kids. She was ignored at check-in by the concierge. She told me she almost left, but stayed because of the change she heard about on the news." Aisha nodded. "What did you do?" "I gave her a voucher, but more importantly, I sat down with her, asked her what she needed." She cried. "Because someone finally saw her," Aisha said. "Good, that's the job now." Meanwhile, Mariana was walking the service floor with Devon, inspecting new breakroom furniture and freshly painted walls. The vending machine had been replaced. Wi-Fi had been upgraded. There were even real plants in the corners, a small but radical act of respect for the people who kept the hotel running. "They're noticing," Mariana said, "not just the updates, the tone." Devon gestured to a freshly posted flyer. "All voices welcome. Staff listening sessions with Dr. Morgan, Fridays at 3 p.m. "I've worked in a dozen hotels," Devon said. "Never seen anything like this." "It's not a rebrand," Mariana replied. "It's a rerouting." Back in her office, Celeste was preparing for the first of those Friday listening sessions. No formal agenda, just an open room and chairs. 5 people came in, then 10, then more. By the time she sat down, the room was full. Security guards, front desk agents, maintenance workers, a sous chef, even an older guest service clerk who'd been at the hotel since the first brick was laid. One by one, they shared. The time a guest refused to let a housekeeper into their room because she looked suspicious. The moment a bellhop was told to stand behind the luggage cart during a staff photo so he wouldn't clutter the frame. The night a security guard was questioned by management because a guest didn't believe he worked there. Celeste listened to every word. And when she finally spoke, it was quiet, steady. "Thank you for trusting me with this. I can't change the past, but I can make damn sure it doesn't become the future." Applause wasn't needed. What they gave her instead was trust. That night, Celeste received an email from the corporate CEO of International Elegance Holdings. The subject line read, "Proud, keep going." The body of the message was just one sentence. "You've turned a hotel into a movement." But Celeste didn't reply right away. She looked out the window, where a couple, an older black woman and her husband, were walking slowly through the garden. They held hands. They looked peaceful. No one stared at them. No one followed. No one questioned. They just were. That was the movement. That was the mission. She closed the laptop and sat still in the silence for a while, letting the weight of it all settle. Because leading wasn't just making policies or firing CEOs. It was showing up every day for the invisible battles, for the silent victories, for the dignity that didn't make headlines. And in that silence, she made a promise to herself, one she would keep for as long as she wore the name badge. That no one else would ever have to prove they belonged in a place that claimed to welcome everyone. Because now, the welcome was real. By the end of the week, something unexpected began to happen. Guests started leaving notes. Not just tips or reviews, notes. Handwritten messages slipped beneath doors, left on front desks, or folded into thank you cards for housekeeping. Notes that said things like, "This was the first time I felt safe in a hotel lobby. Your staff looked like me, that matters. Thank you for building a space where we don't have to shrink ourselves." Celeste kept every single one. She read them quietly in the early morning before meetings. Some made her cry, others made her laugh. All of them reminded her why she had stepped into the fire in the first place. It wasn't about correcting one man's actions. It was about unlearning the culture that made those actions acceptable in the first place. And now the culture was changing. The Grant Regency had become a mirror, not just to itself, but to the entire industry. Rival properties had begun sending quiet emails. A five-star competitor across town requested a private conversation with Aisha about implementing bias training. A boutique hotel in San Francisco wanted Celeste to speak to their board. Even vendors were reaching out. Florists, linen suppliers, staffing agencies, all wanting to understand how to align themselves with a place that had chosen integrity over image. But Celeste didn't let the attention become distraction. She stayed rooted in the daily work. She started her mornings in the staff kitchen, listening to what people were actually saying, not what showed up in reports. She walked the lobby every afternoon, watching how guests were greeted, noticing the shifts in posture, tone, and intention. And at night, she read those guest notes again, like scripture. One night she received a note unlike the others. No name, no room number, just a small white envelope left at the front desk. Inside, a folded piece of hotel stationery read, "I worked under Elijah, I followed his rules, I was scared to speak up, but after what you did, I've started saying no. I stopped questioning guests because of how they looked. I started listening. You didn't just change the hotel, you gave me back my voice." She sat with that one longer than the rest. Because that note wasn't about policy, or power, or press. It was about liberation. And that meant the most. The next day, Celeste introduced a new initiative, the Regency Standard, a new internal code of hospitality ethics written not just by corporate, but with staff input. It included everything from anti-bias protocols and inclusive language guides to dignity clauses for both guests and employees. It was printed in 8 languages. It was posted in every department. And it was required reading. Mariana led the first orientation, standing at the front of the employee meeting hall, holding the booklet like it was a declaration. "This," she said, "is the new foundation, not just service, service with soul. If you've ever been told to smile through discrimination, to swallow discomfort, or to let it go when you knew something was wrong. This is your permission to stop. This is your right to speak. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was deep. Meanwhile, the hotel's social media presence began to transform. Once a curated feed of generic luxury, white marble tubs, gold-rimmed glasses, champagne flutes on balconies, now featured actual stories, portraits of real employees, snippets of real guest experiences, testimonies of change. The caption beneath one post read, "This is Lewis. He's been in housekeeping for 12 years. Last week, he trained 2 new hires and taught them that excellence isn't about being invisible, it's about being respected." The comments exploded. People weren't just booking rooms. They were believing in the vision. One day, a mother checked in with her teenage daughter, a first-time guest. The girl spotted Celeste in the lobby and whispered, "Mom, that's her. That's the woman from the story." Celeste overheard. She turned, smiled, and knelt slightly to meet the girl's eye level. "Hi," she said gently, "welcome." The girl beamed. "You're the boss, right?" "I am," Celeste said. "How did you do it?" she asked. Celeste paused for a moment, then said, "By refusing to leave quietly." The girl smiled, eyes wide. "I want to be like you." "You already are," Celeste said. "You just haven't had to prove it yet." In a private meeting later that week, Gerald brought Celeste a letter from the National Hospitality Federation. They wanted to honor her with their annual Integrity in Leadership Award. Celeste read it twice, then slid it back across the desk. "Not yet," she said. "Why not?" Gerald asked. "Because we're not done." She wasn't being humble, she was being honest. This wasn't about becoming a symbol. It was about becoming a standard. Still, the staff threw a quiet celebration on the rooftop garden, not for press, not for profit, just for pride. No champagne. Just music, laughter, and real conversations. Cassie was there too. She hadn't said much since Elijah's departure, but tonight she approached Celeste with something she hadn't shown anyone, an old email draft. It was a whistleblower report she had written, but never sent. "I was going to expose him," she said quietly, 3 years ago, but I didn't, I was scared. Celeste took the phone and read the first line of the draft. "I don't want to ruin a man's life, but I can't keep helping him ruin other people's." Celeste handed the phone back. "You didn't fail," she said. "You survived. That's not weakness, that's wisdom." Cassie's eyes welled. "I should have spoken up." "You just did." They stood together at the railing, watching staff dance under string lights. Cassie exhaled slowly. "This feels like freedom." "It is," Celeste said. "Freedom doesn't always shout. Sometimes it looks like a shift schedule without fear. Sometimes it looks like laughter on a rooftop. Sometimes it looks like being able to show up as yourself." Cassie nodded. "And what does it look like for you?" Celeste looked out at the city. "It looks like finally being able to build, instead of just prove." It began with a single workshop. A simple event posted discreetly in the Grant Regency's event calendar. Inclusive hospitality, reimagining luxury through equity and empathy. Hosted by Dr. Celeste Morgan, open to hospitality professionals citywide, free admission. The ballroom was expected to seat 50. Over 200 RSVP'd. Celeste stood backstage, scanning the faces in the crowd. They came from all over, desk agents from suburban inns, concierge leads from downtown boutiques, cleaning staff from budget motels, and GMs from 4-star franchises across the Southeast. Not a press event, not a corporate summit, just people, most of them women, most of them black and brown, gathering to imagine something more. She stepped up to the podium and didn't wait for applause. "I'm not here to teach you something you don't already know," she began. "I'm here to say what many of you have been whispering for years, that luxury has never been neutral, and we no longer have to contort ourselves to be allowed in its spaces." A stillness swept the room. You've been told to smile when you're disrespected, to overlook microaggressions for the sake of guest experience. You've been told to shrink, to blend in, to not make it about race. But today, we make it about reality. She paused. This isn't a rebrand, this is a reclamation. They stood before she even finished. Not because of celebrity, but because they recognized truth. That evening, the ballroom was renamed. It had once been called the Monarch Room, a nod to European royalty, complete with gold-framed oil paintings and crown-shaped chandeliers. Now a new plaque hung outside. The Morgan Room, in honor of those who stood their ground before they had titles. The redesign was subtle, the paintings replaced with portraits of staff, the color palette softened, the lighting lowered, less imperial, more intimate. But the most powerful shift, a small inscription on the wall beneath the new room name. Luxury is not how you are treated because of your status. It's how you are honored despite assumptions. Celeste didn't pose next to the plaque. She didn't invite press. She stood quietly near the back wall, arms crossed, watching as guests and staff alike walked by and paused, reading the words and whispering thanks. Meanwhile, the board of International Elegance Holdings sent a new internal directive. All properties under IEH would be required to implement a regional version of the Regency standard within 12 months. Not suggested. Required. The ripple had become a wave. Celeste met with regional executives from Dubai, Toronto, and Sao Paulo via video call later that week. Each one spoke of how her work had shaken something loose inside their own teams. It's not just about the US, said one director from the IEH Paris branch. It's the entire model. We've been designing for comfort, but only for the already comfortable. Celeste nodded. That's over now. At the Grant Regency, change continued in quieter, more personal ways. The valet staff had stopped using code names to describe guests, a long-time practice Elijah had tolerated. No more Tango Bravo for a black man in a hoodie, no more white glove for elderly white guests who needed extra hand-holding. Now it was just names, respectful, direct, human. The kitchen staff had begun a Dish Stories initiative, naming menu items after the background of the chefs who created them. There was Mateo's Malay, Surya's South Indian curry bowl, and Rosa's sweet potato pound cake. Guests could scan a QR code to read each creator's story. It was luxury redefined, not by price tags, but by presence. By story. By soul. One afternoon, Celeste joined housekeeping supervisor Bernice as she checked in on new staff hires. I've been here 10 years, Bernice said, inspecting the linen closet. And this is the first time I feel like I'm allowed to speak in a meeting without looking over my shoulder. Celeste smiled. You've always been allowed, they just made you think you were. Bernice gave her a look, one of quiet agreement. I used to watch you on that security footage. The night he threw you out, I never told anyone, but I watched it 10 times. Celeste looked at her. Why? Because it reminded me that I wasn't crazy, that we weren't crazy. Celeste exhaled. No, Bernice, you weren't crazy, you were surviving. Downstairs in the lobby, Simone, the new front desk hire, handled a situation that might have caused chaos just a month ago. A guest complained that his preferred room wasn't available. He blamed the delay on incompetent staff. He used a word that shouldn't be repeated. Simone didn't panic. She didn't apologize for his language. She followed the new protocol, asked him calmly but firmly to lower his voice, offered alternate accommodations. When he refused, Gerald, now promoted to assistant general manager, escorted him to the lounge to resolve the matter away from the lobby. He never raised his voice once. Later, Simone confided in Celeste, a month ago, I probably would have just cried in the break room. Celeste put a hand on her shoulder. A month ago, the hotel didn't deserve you, now it does. Back in her office, Celeste opened a letter from her father. They hadn't always seen eye to eye. He'd been raised in a different time, one where fighting systems like this came at great cost. But now, he wrote, I watched you on the news. You did what I didn't know how to do. You changed it from the inside. I'm proud of you in ways I never had language for. She wept quietly at her desk. Not out of pain, but release. That night, as the sky turned violet and the skyline flickered to life, Celeste walked the perimeter of the property alone. She paused in front of the imperial suite. The same suite she'd been denied. It had been booked that night by a black businesswoman in her late 50s, traveling solo. Celeste knocked once, lightly. The door opened. The woman looked surprised, then smiled. I just wanted to say, Celeste said softly, you belong here. The woman smiled back. I know, because you made it that way. Celeste turned to leave. But before she stepped away, the woman added, You're the reason I booked this room. I wanted to stand where someone once said we didn't belong and breathe anyway. Celeste nodded, voice thick. Breathe all you want. This space is yours now. The door closed gently. And for a moment, Celeste stood in the hallway of the place that had once told her no, hearing only the echo of her own steady breath, strong, sure, and sovereign. Because no matter who built the tower, she had built the truth inside it. 6 months later, the Grant Regency didn't just look different. It felt different. The velvet ropes at the entrance were gone. The concierge desk now had a placard that read, Ask us anything, everyone is welcome here. The waiting area chairs weren't separated by stanchions or subtle cues of hierarchy anymore. There were no more power seats. Guests mingled. Staff smiled for real. Eye contact was not performance, it was connection. And in the center of it all stood Celeste Morgan, no longer the woman who had been thrown out of the hotel lobby. Now she was the lobby. Every inch of it bore her fingerprints. Not in a way that screamed, in a way that lingered. Subtle, strong, permanent. On this particular morning, the hotel was hosting something rare. A student tour group from a historically black college just outside the city. 20 juniors and seniors majoring in hospitality, all of them sharp, hungry, and curious, wide-eyed at the chandeliers, respectful of the marble floors, but grounded in their own ambition. Celeste met them in the Morgan Room, now used as a community space, not just high-ticket events. The chairs were arranged in a circle, not rows. Let me guess, she said, smiling as they entered. You've all read the article. They chuckled and nodded. One student raised her hand. We read all of them. Celeste sat on the edge of her chair. Then let me tell you what didn't make it into the article. They lined in. They didn't print the part where I almost walked away, not just from this hotel, from this industry. They didn't print the part where I thought being excellent would protect me, or the part where I memorized every wine label and whitewashed my resume just to make interviews less awkward. Silence. But I'm still here, not because I belong more now, but because I finally stopped trying to shrink into spaces that were never designed with me in mind. A student named Layla whispered, So what changed? Celeste looked around the room, then back at her. I stopped asking for a seat at the table, and I built a better table. They clapped not out of obligation, but because something inside them had shifted. She stayed with them for another hour. They asked questions about leadership, about conflict, about what happens after you win the fight. Celeste answered, each one not like a celebrity, not like a corporate executive, but like someone who had walked the road barefoot. Before they left, she gave each student a signed copy of the Regency Standard with a handwritten note on the inside cover. Don't wait for permission to lead. Let your presence be the policy. Celeste. Later that evening, Gerald knocked gently on her office door. You're not gonna like this, he said, holding a tablet. Try me. He handed it to her. It was an email from a boutique hotel in Dubai, an IEH sister property. Their regional manager had just been removed following guest discrimination complaints. The email asked if Celeste would be willing to fly out for a site visit and help rebuild. Celeste read it twice. "Another cleanup," she muttered. "Looks that way." She leaned back. "You know, I didn't set out to become a fixer." Gerald smiled. "That's what happens when you build better. People notice where the real architects are." She exhaled. "Tell them I'll call in the morning." He nodded. "Want me to clear your schedule for tomorrow?" "No," she said, "but maybe block out the afternoon. I need a walkthrough." Gerald raised a brow. "Walkthrough of what?" "The new staff housing, the West Wing renovations, and I want to visit the third-floor housekeeping locker room. The flooring looked warped last time." "You're still doing site checks?" he asked, amused. She gave him a look. "Leadership doesn't start at the top. It starts in the corners, where no one's watching." He left, shaking his head with a smile. Later, as the hotel quieted and the lights dimmed into evening mode, Celeste took the long way down to the lobby. She passed closed meeting rooms, quiet hallways, and polished staircases that once intimidated her, now just stone and steel, no longer sacred. She paused near the front entrance where it had all begun. The exact spot. 6 months ago, she stood there, a successful woman with a reservation, a name, and a legacy, and she'd still been denied. Thrown out. Dismissed. But not destroyed. A few feet away, a young couple stood near the concierge desk, arguing softly about where to find late-night food. The woman, clearly tired from travel, asked, "Do you think they'll even take us seriously dressed like this?" The concierge overheard, and he leaned over the counter with a warm smile. "We take everyone seriously here. It's kind of our thing now." The woman blinked, surprised, then she smiled just a little. Celeste watched it all from the shadows. That was it. The wind. Not the headlines, not the board meetings, not the awards she continued to turn down. This. A moment that didn't need her presence to happen, because her values had already written themselves into the walls. She walked out into the night air. The sky was painted navy, with stars barely visible behind the city lights. She stood there for a while, letting it all come to her, the memory, the pain, the irony, the justice, and finally, the peace. A voice behind her said, "Dr. Morgan." She turned. It was the new regional VP, young, eager, nervous. "I just wanted to say, I've studied your whole arc. What you did here, I want to bring that to other properties. Your leadership blueprint, it's the future." Celeste tilted her head. "It's not a blueprint." He looked confused. "It's not." "It's a mirror," she said. "A mirror." "Yes, it shows people what they refuse to see until they have no choice but to change." She nodded at him. "You don't need to copy me. You need to look honestly at the reflection in your space and then fix what's broken." He nodded slowly, understood. She stepped away, leaving him to stand in the place where history had pivoted. The doors closed behind her. And for the first time since all of it began, she walked away not from pain, but toward purpose. Toward legacy. Because justice wasn't a moment. It was a movement. And Celeste Morgan. She wasn't just the woman who was thrown out of a hotel. She was the woman who changed what a hotel could be. Forever. The next time you walk into a hotel, take a look around. Ask yourself who's holding the door, who's behind the desk, who's making you feel welcome, and more importantly, who is. Because what happened to Celeste wasn't fiction. It happens every day in hotels, restaurants, offices, and institutions around the world. People judged not for who they are, but for how they appear. People told they don't belong, not because of anything they did, but because of the assumptions others made before they ever opened their mouths. But Celeste didn't stay silent. She didn't shrink. She stood up, even when it would have been easier to walk away. She reminded the world that professionalism doesn't have a skin tone, that excellence doesn't belong to a select few, that respect is not something to be earned, it's something everyone deserves from the moment they walk through the door. And in doing so, she changed everything. Not with vengeance, but with vision. She rebuilt the very system that tried to break her and made it better for the ones coming behind her. So if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, treated like you were invisible, this story is your reminder. Your presence is powerful. Your story matters. And no one has the right to question your worth just because they can't recognize your greatness. So walk tall. Speak truth. And when the world tells you you don't belong, prove them wrong by building something they can't ignore. Because justice isn't just about getting even. It's about building a future where no one has to fight just to be seen.